Hello, Boldarians, and welcome back to Boldly Becoming, the space where we talk about living boldly, walking in purpose, and answering the call on your life. I am your host, Kenyatta, and before we get started today, I want to take a moment and acknowledge something very special. Today is a very special day. We are honoring March and all the episodes that we did in March, but today is airing in April, so today is April 2nd, and today is my mom's birthday. So Mom, if you're listening, I know you are. Happy birthday. Thank you for the love you've poured into our family, the faith you've modeled, and for the strength and wisdom you've carried throughout your life. You have impacted so many people, and I hope today reminds you just how deeply you are appreciated and celebrated. And Mom, a lot of the wisdom I'm reflecting on today's episode is wisdom that began with the foundation you helped build in me. I love you, and I hope you have a beautiful birthday. So now, today's episode is our monthly recap, a moment where we slow down, reflect, and look at what this past month has been teaching us. Not just conversations we had here on the podcast, but deeper lessons unfolding in real life. And if I'm honest with you, March began a little differently for me. This month started with a sense of emotional heaviness. Not in a dramatic or overwhelming way, but in that quiet way where you can feel your heart processing things beneath the surface. Moments of reflection, moments of grief, moments of recognizing patterns and emotions that God was asking me to sit with instead of rushing past. And in this season, I realized something important about how I process those moments. Instead of immediately sharing heaviness with the people closest to me, I intentionally isolated myself for a little while. Not from a place of withdrawal, not from a place of avoidance, but from a place of discernment. Because sometimes before we invite other voices into what we are feeling, we first need a space to understand what God is showing us. So I sat with it. I prayed through it. I journaled through it, and I allowed God to meet me in it. And in that quiet space, I began to recognize something that I believe God has been teaching me in this season of life. The difference between protecting yourself and defending yourself. Because for most of my life, when something felt heavy or uncomfortable, my instinct was to explain myself, to process it out loud, or to make sure people understood where I was coming from. But this time, God was teaching me something different. He was teaching me how to be still long enough to understand what I was feeling first. And that's where this realization began to take shape. There is meaningful difference between protecting yourself and defending yourself. Defending yourself usually comes from a reactive place. It often rises out of hurt, fear, pride, or just the need to prove something. When we defend ourselves, we are trying to justify our perspective, correct someone's perception, or make sure our intentions are understood. Defense keeps us in a posture of combat, and that's mentally, emotionally, and sometimes even spiritually, even when we are technically right. Defense keeps our attention focused on the conflict, but protection, it's different. Protection is rooted in wisdom and boundaries. Protection doesn't always require explanation, engagement. Sometimes protection simply says, this is not where I'm called to stand anymore. Protection is quiet. Protection is intentional. Protection is aligned with discernment. And one of the things I realized as I sat with God in that heaviness is that defending ourselves can sometimes keep us focused on people or situations that God is actually trying to move us out of. Defense asks questions like, how do I prove my point? How do I make them understand? And how do I correct what they said about me? But protection asks a different question. It asks, God, what is the wise response here? Is this something you want me to engage with or something you want me to release? And what I felt God reminding me of in this season is something simple but powerful. I don't have to defend what He is doing in my life. I just have to remain aligned with it. And when I look back at the conversations we had this month on the podcast, I realized another thing that was very interesting. Many of the things we explored were actually reflections of that same lesson: trusting God's timing, honoring longing without shame, healing in connection, becoming without an audience, and recognizing the kind of love that does not require chasing. So let's walk through this month together. Let's start with episode 26. So we open up the month with a conversation about the temptation to rush what God is still developing. In that episode, I reflected on my journey of becoming a therapist and moving to Texas. Seasons where I wanted things to move much faster than they actually did. But because when you're in the middle of becoming, there's often a quiet pressure to accelerate your life, to reach the next milestone faster, to arrive sooner, and to skip the slow parts of growth. But what I was reminded of and what I shared with you is that rushing rarely leads to readiness. God was not delaying my life, He was developing me. Every season waiting was building the capacity I would eventually need to sustain the life I was praying for. Sometimes the very thing we want to accelerate is the very thing God is intentionally allowing to ripen. Then we moved to episode 27. And in this conversation was about the difference between loneliness and longing. And for a long time in my own life, I labeled myself as lonely when relationships ended or when partnership had not arrived yet. But when I sat with that honestly, I realized something important. I wasn't lonely. I was longing. Loneliness is disconnection, but longing is desire. Longing is the human desire for connection, partnership, and shared life. And there is nothing broken about that. Longing does not require shame, it requires patience, because longing is not a sign that something is missing within you. Sometimes it's simply a reminder that your heart is still open. Now, this is one of my favorite conversations in episode 28. This is when Adrian and Daniel came back to our Boldly Becoming space. These are two men that I know personally and deeply respect. And what made this conversation so meaningful was the honesty and vulnerability they brought to the discussion about healing in relationships. What stood out to me most is that healing does not lead everyone to the same destination at the same time. For some people, healing leads them inward towards slowing down and becoming more intentional before entering relationships, key the dating process. But for others, healing leads them towards partnership, building something meaningful with someone who meets them in that growth, being engaged, married. Both paths require courage, emotional honesty, and self awareness. And I want to take a moment here to say a special thank you to Adrienne and Daniel for sharing their voices, their perspectives, and their vulnerability with this community. Conversations like this matter, and I'm grateful they trusted this space enough to have that conversation here. Now, we had a bonus episode, and that was waiting, timing, and community. So we released this bonus reflection about waiting, but not waiting in frustration, waiting with peace. For the first time in my life, I truly feel aligned in the season I'm in. There are things I deeply desire: partnership, finishing my book, purchasing my first home, but I'm not chasing those things. I'm preparing for them. Waiting does not mean life is paused. Waiting can actually be one of the most meaningful seasons of your life, because while we wait, God is still shaping us, still aligning us, and still preparing us. Then we moved into episode 29, one of the most powerful reflections of the month, I believe: becoming without an audience. In that episode, we followed the story of Micah, a man whose life looked the same on the outside, but was changing deeply on the inside. He was choosing discipline, choosing alignment, and choosing God, and no one was applauding him for it. But real transformation often happens exactly like that, not in public, but in private. Some of the most sacred parts of becoming happens in silence, in the decisions no one else sees. And just because your growth is not visible yet does not mean it's not real. Now we closed the month, so we just freshly got off of this one with a conversation about love, but not the kind of love that creates confusion, the kind that brings peace. Because healing eventually leads us to a place where we stop chasing connection. We stop performing for love. We stop trying to convince someone to choose us. Instead, we become grounded in ourselves. And from that place, we begin to recognize something powerful. The right love doesn't need chasing. It meets you, it aligns with you, and it chooses you clearly. So when I look back at March, what I see is a month that quietly taught me something important. There is a difference between protecting yourself and defending yourself. Defending ourselves often comes with fear, trying to prove something, trying to explain ourselves, and trying to control how others perceive us. But protecting your peace is different. It comes from alignment. It comes from knowing who you are, trusting God with what is meant for you, and allowing the right things to meet you without force. And the more I walk with God in this season, the more I realize something simple yet powerful. I don't have to defend what God is doing in my life. I just have to remain aligned with it. So if March has taught you anything, I hope it reminds you of this. You don't have to rush what God is ripening. You don't have to shame your longing, and you don't have to chase love, and definitely don't have to perform your becoming for anyone else to see. Just remain aligned and keep becoming boldly. There's also was an extra bonus episode added very, very late in March, and so I just put it in before this recap. So I hope you enjoy. We didn't get a chance to reflect on it, but I hope you enjoy it. Bye for now.